Hello everyone, and welcome to episode 114. Today's show will be the final episode in our series on the Arachnids, and as is tradition with these final episodes, we're going to explore the relationship between arachnids and humans. We're going to look at how human cultures have engaged with arachnids, how humans have interacted with them in their shared environments, how humans have used them for food or for venom, and how humans have viewed the arachnids ecologically, aesthetically, and symbolically. In this context, the arachnids are somewhat unique. Compared to the insects or the crustaceans, the arachnids are relatively obscure and cryptic. Many of the arachnids are either small and hard to notice, like microscopic mites, or they don't have a particularly wide geographic distribution, and most pre-modern human cultures have just never come into contact with them, like the amblypyge whip spiders, which are uncommon pretty much anywhere with snowy winters. The true spiders are a notable exception. While there seems to be a weirdly high abundance and biodiversity of spiders in Australia and New Zealand in particular, the order Arachnii as a whole has thousands of representative species found in habitats across the world, on all continents except Antarctica, from coastlines to mountains, from jungles to deserts, both hot and cold. Every human culture knows the spider, in whatever local variations it might take. And with the spider comes their extended phenotype, the spider web. The shape and the structure of the web can take many forms, from the classical pinwheel shape to the ball-shaped orb webs, to lampshade webs, to sock or tube-like webs that line the inside of a spider's burrow. In each case, the spider spins this elaborate structure, this web, which serves as a kind of trap, a place where the spider can wait for prey to ensnare itself, to then be approached, envenomated, and eaten. Humans, having observed this process at every step, have come to value and appreciate spiders in many ways. By building elaborate webs, sometimes multiple times a day, they demonstrate a very high degree of industriousness, productivity, and persistence. Upon the web, the spider waits for prey, demonstrating discipline and patience. The spinning of the web with strands of silk has been widely attributed across multiple cultures as inspiration for the spinning of fibers and weaving of textiles. That the spider produces silk from within its own body and uses that to create a landscape of its own has led to their inclusion in creation myths. The web itself, with its reticulating pattern, is symbolic of interconnections, both real and metaphorical. Now, first things first, I want to look at how ancient humans interacted with spiders and the other arachnids. Then, as these interactions led to knowledge, and that knowledge was mythologized, the arachnids found themselves in the stories and legends of human cultures. As human society evolved, so too did our understanding and appreciation of the arachnids, resulting in widespread and often surprising influences on our modern world. Okay, so with that said, let's get started. As the arachnids have been around for many millions of years, they would have been familiar to our primate ancestors. From the tree canopy to the grassland plains to the rocky deserts, the spiders and scorpions and other lesser-known groups of arachnids were all there. Sometimes an arachnid would reveal itself by the presence of a burrow opening in the dirt, or, more characteristically, a web built between trees or bush branches. Even a primitive ancestral hominid would be able to see a large web sprawling through the leaves, dew-covered and glistening in the morning sunlight. I'll get into this in more detail later on, but the spider's web as a hunting practice, as a hunting method, has long been viewed throughout the world as a symbol of ingenuity and industriousness, as well as patience. And the spider's spinning of its silken web has been suggested as a direct inspiration for the first textiles. Sometimes the arachnid doesn't reveal itself with a web. Other times, the arachnid reveals itself with a painful surprise, like a bite, a sting, or a pinch. Fortunately, even for our primitive ancestors without modern medicine, most of these encounters are harmless. The spider lacks sufficient venom to harm a human, or the scorpion's pinch didn't break the skin. In the worst-case scenario, a spider bite or a scorpion sting might cause some mild pain and bruising that goes away after a day or two. Solifugi, for example, are freakish and scary-looking arachnids with disproportionately large and powerful chelicera, but they lack venom, and even their most painful bites are, at worst, superficial scratches. But a minority of arachnid encounters aren't so fortunate. Although only a small number of arachnids are dangerous to humans, when one of those arachnids, like one of those venomous spiders, gets in a bite or a dangerous scorpion gets in a sting, the outcomes can be brutal, disfiguring, even lethal. For example, less than 2% of all known scorpion species possess venom that's deadly to humans, and nearly all of the scorpions that are deadly to humans are in the Buthidae family. The scorpion venom is chemically diverse, with a rich variety of compounds that all have some kind of biological effect. The most dangerous compounds in the scorpion venom are those that disrupt neuromuscular function. These neurotoxins alter the activity of the voltage-gated sodium channels in the neural membrane. They make sodium channels open more often, and they can keep them open for longer periods of time, and this leads to an influx of sodium into the neuron. You might remember from some of my episodes on neurology, by controlling the influx or outflux of various ions like sodium and potassium respectively, neurons can produce electrochemical signals that move across their membranes. These are called action potentials, and they allow neurons in your brain to share information, and they allow neurons in your peripheral nervous system to carry messages from your brain to help your body move around in coordinated fashions or bring sensory information from your body back to your brain. But the point is, when these ion channels and these ion concentration gradients and stuff, when all of this gets messed up, like you have some kind of scorpion venom come in and hold the sodium channels open for way longer than they should, this can cause damage to the neural cell and the tissue that it innervates. In this case, when there's a disproportionate influx of sodium into the neuron, this leads to prolonged or continuous neural activation in the affected muscle tissue, which leads to intense muscle contraction. It's basically like an excruciating muscle cramp that won't go away. In serious cases, this can disrupt respiratory function and lead to heart failure. The Amazonian scorpion, Titius seriolatus, is an extremely dangerous species in a particularly dangerous genus. Its venoms have autonomic nervous system effects that include the release of adrenaline and acetylcholine, leading to physiological symptoms like an elevated heart rate, higher blood pressure, sweating and shaking, as well as nausea, diarrhea, and vomiting. A particular neurotoxic compound found in scorpion venom is an alpha toxin called CVIV4. In a study on 2 Centroroides species, it was discovered that CVIV4 specifically alters sodium channels on nociceptors, or the sensory cells that are responsible for pain signals. CVIV4 is quite literally a venom compound whose evolved purpose appears to be causing pain, and lots of it. Scorpions need chemicals like this to really put weight behind the threat, to immediately discourage the predator and make it leave the scorpion alone. That's the whole point here, is to discourage predation. Now, the only non-Buthidae scorpion with venom that's deadly to humans is the Hemoscorpius lepturus, whose venom is cytotoxic. It's able to kill cells, with a particular affinity for destroying red blood cells. An effective sting from Hemoscorpius lepturus will damage a large number of red blood cells. It'll kill them and lead to a large number of dead red blood cell bodies clumping up in the bloodstream. This can block or coagulate the blood. It can create hemorrhages and blood clots, and this ultimately leads to organ inflammation, like in the lungs, and organ failure, like in the heart or kidneys. And on the skin, it leaves behind oozing blisters and weeping craters of necrotic flesh that heal really slowly. The effect is actually pretty similar to some of the venoms seen in spiders, like the brown recluse, Loxoscoles reclusa. In fact, the gangrenous craters of rotting flesh often caused by these cytotoxic venoms are called loxocoelisms, in reference to the brown recluse. A primary cause of this condition is sphingomyelin phosphodiesterase D toxin, which destroys sphingomyelin, a lipid compound found in cell membranes and neural cell myelin sheathing. Exposure to sphingomyelin phosphodiesterase D toxin can rapidly compromise a cell membrane and destroy the cell. This can disrupt neural firing and cause extreme pain and prolonged muscle contractions, among other horrible things. There's another condition called lactrodectism, which is caused by a sufficiently strong bite from a widow spider in the Lactrodectis genus. Their venom is potent enough as it is, but it also contains a unique chemical called latrotoxin, which is known to cause severe pain and muscle cramps at the bite location, which then radiate throughout the body and seem to be the most intense in the abdomen. These body-wide muscle cramps are accompanied by headaches, nausea, vomiting, and of course, lots and lots of pain. Now, a bite or a sting from a spider or a scorpion or what have you can be countered with antivenom, which will stop the venom from further messing you up. Creating antivenom requires the use of a host animal, usually something like a horse because of its size and its health. A controlled quantity of venom is injected into the horse, or whatever other animal is being used. Their immune system is capable of producing antibodies against the venom. A sample of horse blood is then extracted and undergoes processes to isolate the venom antibodies. Mix enough of these purified antibodies into a solution, and bam, there you go, you have your antivenom. Unfortunately, this means that you can potentially have an allergic reaction to the animal antibodies in the course of receiving the antivenom treatment for a spider bite or a scorpion sting. It would really suck to go from suffering from some kind of arachnid venom to the relief of getting the antivenom to the sudden terror of realizing you're having an extreme allergic reaction, in which case you'll need to go get your EpiPen or something and inject that to stop the allergic reaction. In any case, it's a very neat method, and the technical logistics of the process help explain why antivenoms are so expensive. The cost is worth it though, as antivenoms have historically saved many lives from an excruciating death by envenomation. As fearsome as arachnid venoms are, they're also extremely interesting. As I mentioned earlier, the venom of your typical spider or scorpion is rich with biochemicals. They include all sorts of compounds with all sorts of effects. And now that we've developed technology that lets us analyze and manipulate these chemicals and study their effects on biological systems at the molecular level, we're finding that they have profound medical value. Chemicals that were once known only for their inclusion in the pain and suffering of arachnid envenomation are now being recognized as potential therapeutic agents and analgesics. Right now, a lot of this stuff is still in medical trials, but it's still really exciting. For example, the deathstalker scorpion, Liurus quinquestriatus, produces chlorotoxin in its venom. And as it happens, chlorotoxin is currently going through human trials for its therapeutic effects against glioma, which is a type of brain cancer caused by the overgrowth of glial cells. Similarly, the Trinidad chevron tarantula, Salmopoeus cambridgei, possesses a venomous peptide called salmotoxin, or PCTX1, that also targets malignant glioma cells by messing up their membrane ion activity. In addition, PCTX1 shows potential as a drug intervention for stroke patients, as it blocks a certain kind of acid-sensing ion channel that floods the neuron with lethal amounts of calcium ions. Salmotoxin shuts down that ion channel, blocking the calcium influx and protecting the neuron from cell death. If that could be turned into a viable interventionary medicine, that could save lives. By preventing neural cell death, this could potentially be an emergency method to protect against stroke-induced brain damage and all the terrible symptoms and potential loss of life associated with that. Mini spider venoms show potential for treating various types of cancer. The Chinese hairy spider Macrothele raven produces compounds called raven toxins, which disrupt the cell cycle and completely stop the cancerous cell from growing and dividing. Raven toxins are effective at shrinking tumors by necrotizing and destroying the cancer cells. The Chinese wolf spider Lycosa singoriensis produces a peptide called lycosin-1, which can slow down the growth of tumors and induce apoptosis in tumor cells. And the Central Asian spider Lacasana terabivii produces the peptide latarsin-2A, which has been observed to disrupt tumor cell membranes and then inactivate the mitochondria and kill off the cell. Even the very dangerous Brazilian wandering spider, Phonutria nigriventer, whose venom is particularly painful and induces severe respiratory and cardiovascular symptoms. Despite the Phonutria nigriventer's venom being particularly dangerous, it also includes several compounds with potential medicinal benefits. For example, the PHTX2 chemical group is particularly deadly, but TX31, TX33, TX35, and TX36 are all potential pain-relieving compounds that work on different receptors, and TX26 is being experimented with as a possible treatment for erectile dysfunction. This is actually one of the more curious symptoms of many arachnid venoms. They cause priapism, or a prolonged erection that can last for hours. The funny response to that is that, okay, well, if you just want to have fun in bed, go get bit by a spider first and then you'll be ready to go. But in reality, it's not a good thing at all. This arachnid venom-induced priapism can be extremely painful, and in severe cases it can lead to a loss of sensation and/or function. And if this isn't treated quickly, it can possibly lead to necrosis, where the tissue in the penis will get damaged and start to die off. It'll begin to rot, and then the dead, rotten, necrotic penis will fall off. Yeah, it's not fun at all. It's actually extremely horrible. So it's something that needs to get medical intervention, medical treatment, really quickly, pretty much as soon as possible. Now, despite this particularly gruesome consequence, this sting-induced priapism has heavily influenced cultural views of scorpions as symbols of human sexuality. In the Indo-Pakistan culture, for example, the scorpion is a metaphor of carnal desire and reckless lust. A particularly attractive and sexually active man who has a reputation for being cruel or aggressive can be called a scorpion. The image of a woman being stung by a scorpion is referenced in songs and stories about passionate romances and destructive love affairs. In traditional cultures, scorpions were a common ingredient in folk medicines, like those used for treating pain, weakness, difficulty urinating, kidney stones, jaundice, skin conditions, and impotency. For another example, we could look to the Middle East, where the scorpion is a ubiquitous creature. It's frequently invoked in myth and legend, and it has a complex, multifaceted cultural role with many different attributes. For example, in addition to the sexual symbology discussed a moment ago, the scorpion is also seen as both an embodiment of evil, as a vile and malicious entity that stings you out of habit, inflicting pain and suffering as a kind of mundane ablution, and as a protector, a guardian from evil, a symbol of religious strength and purity. There's an old legend of a scorpion who, after being followed across a perilous landscape, stings and kills a snake right before it was about to bite and kill a sleeping woman. Arguably, the symbology of evil is more prominent, perhaps because scorpions are so visually provocative, and their stings so painful and potentially harmful. In Islamic mythology, monstrous, hyper-lethal scorpions populate the depths of hell, and the Prophet Muhammad defined a class of demons and jinn that take the form of venomous creatures, namely snakes and scorpions. Archaeological evidence suggests a more complex picture. Pre-Islamic Middle Eastern societies generally saw the scorpion positively, as a protective entity, a guardian, or a ward against misfortune. Some subtle aspects of this belief have prevailed into Islamic times. Where the scorpion is seen as evil, it's typically in the context of someone struggling to come to terms with their own nature, or where it's kind of like enemy of my enemy, like an evil force that causes harm to you, but also repels other evils and keeps them away from you. I suppose it's fair to say that in Islamic mythology, the scorpion is seen as a very complicated shade of gray figure. It's perhaps a darker shade of gray as it's seen as a manifestation of evil, but it's not pure evil. There's some complex internal struggle going on that shows an inner goodness or an inner light that's trying to fight against the darkness. This kind of moral complexity is also seen in Hindu mythology, where the scorpion often plays the role of a kind of neutral villain, or a creature who stings not out of malice, but because that's just its nature. There are many tales of sages and mystics imparting worldly wisdom after being stung by a scorpion, and not reacting in pain or anger. There's a famous a fable from ancient Persia called The Scorpion and the Turtle. You may have heard this as The Scorpion and the Frog, which is a more modern permutation. Anyway, the scorpion and the turtle, or the frog, need to cross a river, so the scorpion gets on the turtle's back, and the turtle begins to swim. It's carrying the scorpion with it. But partway across the river, the scorpion attempts to sting the turtle. The turtle is confused. The scorpion must know that it can sting through the turtle's shell, and if it stings his soft, leathery skin and gets paralyzed, then he'll sink to the bottom of the river, and the scorpion will drown. It seems entirely pointless and destructive, even self-destructive. But that is the nature of the scorpion. It's a lesson about knowing the nature of people, like recognizing someone who has a tendency towards causing harm, even when it's self-destructive and totally senseless. One of the most well-known incarnations of the scorpion in human culture can be seen in the night sky. The constellation Scorpio is the 8th zodiac sign. It sits between Libra, the weighing scales, to its west, and Sagittarius, the archer, to its east. The original zodiac constellations were developed by the Babylonians, and they called Scorpio something like Mulgir-Tab, the creature with the burning sting. Its tail was the same set of stars, but it also had claws formed by the stars that now make up the constellation Libra, the weighing scales. The concept of the zodiac constellations soon spread throughout the world, from India and China to Europe and the rest of the Middle East. Naturally, there came to be a wealth of myths and stories about the entities in the constellations, including the Great Scorpion, whose beating heart was the red Antares, Alpha Scorpii, the rival of Mars. In Greek mythos, there are several tales about the scorpion being a terrible monster summoned by a god, like Artemis or Apollo, and given the purpose of killing Orion, the boastful hunter. In another tale, where the sun god Helios tries to discourage his son Phaethon from driving his chariot for a day, he tells him of the many dangers in the cosmos that he would come across, mentioning specifically, quote, Scorpio's cruel pincers sweeping out to encircle you from one side, and Cancer's crab claws reaching out from the other, unquote. Where the scorpions and the spiders have relatively complex cultural roles, with a variety of archetypes and layers of symbology applied to them, other arachnids are less charismatic, less morally complicated, and have more one-dimensional representations in human culture, if they get any appreciable mention at all. I'm thinking, of course, of arachnids like the blood-sucking ticks, or the mites who are hardly more than pests that devastate plants and make skin itchy. Or the Solifuge sun spiders, a clade of wonderfully hideous creatures whose greatest cultural impact seems to be the pure terror they inspire from their unusual bodies sprinting across the ground. Despite the fearful reputation of the Solifuge, which is a reputation that's purportedly existed for hundreds if not thousands of years, they're not actually dangerous to humans, as they don't have any venom. The worst they can do is give you a firm little pinch with their crab-like chelicera. Spiders have played arguably an even more prominent role in human culture and myth than any other arachnid. They've been portrayed and respected from all perspectives, as a monster, as a trickster, as a hunter, as a crafter, even as the creator of the universe. Consider an ancient Lydian myth, as retold by the Roman poet Ovid. In this myth, there's a famous dyer of wools and clothes living in a city in eastern Anatolia. The wool dyer is quite skilled and sees much business. His daughter, Arachne, sees his work and becomes familiar with textiles and weaving. Arachne becomes such a good weaver that she becomes overconfident, thinking herself a better weaver than Athena, goddess of war and wisdom. Foolishly, Arachne challenges Athena to a contest to see who is the greatest weaver. Athena accepts the challenge, and she creates a grand tapestry depicting her triumph over Poseidon, god of the sea. While the goddess Athena has created an extraordinarily beautiful tapestry, the mortal Arachne weaves a tapestry that is even better in quality and far more provocative, depicting scenes of infidelity and lewd behavior among the gods of Olympus. Athena admitted that Arachne had bested her in the craft, but she could not abide the egotistical and presumptive attitude of this upstart mortal. In a fit of rage, Athena attacked Arachne, destroying her perfect tapestry and even the loom used to make it. Then Athena cursed Arachne to live in shame and guilt forever. This brutal punishment quickly overwhelmed Arachne, who took her own life out of grief. Athena soon felt pity, and in a gesture of mercy returned Arachne to life, although turned her into a spider so that she could weave her web for all eternity. This myth is notable for the fact that there's a direct relationship between the spider's web weaving and humans weaving textiles. Historically, the web has carried heavy mythological weight and symbolic power. The importance of the web has appeared again and again across time and geographic space. 4,000 years ago, there was a Sumerian goddess, Utu, who was a deity of weaving and colored wools. There's some arguable archaeological evidence, as well as clues from myths and fables, of her being represented or symbolized by the spider. A 4,500-year-old temple complex in Peru, known as the Ventaron Archaeological Site, contains heavy spider symbolism in its inscriptions, its carvings, and its illustrations. Subsequent cultures that inhabited the area built new temples near the original, all of them sharing the spider motif. This spider deity represented textiles and weaving generally, but also hunting nets, war, and military power. It took the form of a massive, terrible spider with the beak of a predatory bird and the fangs of a leopard or other large cat. The much more recent Nazca culture also emerged in this region, and they too viewed spiders with great reverence. One of the massive geoglyphs these people created is a 47-meter-long spider. In Japan, a mythological malevolent spider entity is named after the golden orb spider Trichonophylla clavati. In the mythological lore, this spider entity can transform into a beautiful woman to seduce people passing by, much like how a spider lays a trap to capture and eat some of the insects flying by. In many traditional folklores of African mythology, there's a very popular character named Anansi, or Kwaku Anansi, the spider trickster god. Often taking the form of a spider, Anansi is a storyteller, a well-spoken and wise sage, a clever and cunning trickster who outsmarts his opponents and uses his apparent weaknesses to his advantage. For example, in the African mythological lore, there are many stories about the adventures of Anansi, which usually ends up as some kind of moral lesson or a parable. These were historically very popular in Africa and have led to a wide variety of permutations across the global African diaspora, with countless variations of Anansi and his endless adventures. Throughout history, various figures have recognized arachnids, namely the spiders, as noble and valuable creatures. Two stories from the Middle East involve a notable person being pursued, chased by the foot soldiers of some antagonistic government. The notable person hides in a cave, and while they're there, a spider begins weaving a web over the cave entrance. The pursuing soldiers see the unbroken spider web, so they don't bother searching the cave. The notable person in each story then learns to appreciate the value and the dignity of the spider. Now, in one version of the story, this notable person is Muhammad, prophet of Islam, running from the soldiers of the Quraysh. And in another version of the story, closer to the Levant, the notable person is David, running from soldiers of King Saul. We should also consider the story of Robert the Bruce, the first king of Scotland. In 1296, King Edward I of England invaded Scotland, leading to a complex series of political events, including a very dramatic and deadly betrayal that ultimately led to Robert the Bruce becoming crowned King of Scotland, in defiance of and in a bid for independence from King Edward. Robert the Bruce's forces were utterly devastated at the Battle of Methven in 1306. Robert was driven out of Scotland, his family was captured, and his brothers killed, and as legend has it, him and his followers ended up in a cave on a small, L-shaped island off the coast of Northern Ireland. At this lowest point in his life, Robert the Bruce saw a spider trying to build a web. It was slipping, struggling to climb up its web and connect one piece of silk to another, but it kept trying, it kept persisting in the effort, and eventually it got up to where it needed to be and finished building its web. Robert was inspired by this and saw the spider as a symbol of hope and persistence, even in the face of resistance and difficulty. He returned to Scotland in 1307, and over the next 21 years, he built up his forces and pushed out the English, to ultimately achieve Scottish independence. Now, stepping away from recorded history and coming back to mythology and legend, spiders are frequently identified in creation myths. As the spider creates a web, which is like a small world of its own, the spiders have been mythologized as world builders, as craftsmen, as creators, even creators of the universe itself. This can be seen in many cultures, such as those in the southwestern regions of the Pacific Ocean. For example, the Kiribati have a deity in their traditional pre-colonial religion known as Naro, or the Lord Spider, who created the world and all the cosmos. A similar deity, the old spider Ariop-Inap, is a mythological being in traditional Naru belief systems. Ariop-Inap is a kind of primordial figure whose trials and tribulations led to her creating the earth and the sky with the lower and upper shells of a cosmic clam. Islands in the ocean were created with bits of clam flesh, and the plants that grew upon them were first created with Ariop-Inap's own silk. A great worm, who had exerted himself to help Ariop-Inap, tragically died from his efforts. The great spider mourned the loss of her friend, and wrapped him up in silk to hang him up in the sky, where he would become the Milky Way. In this Naru belief system, humans were yet another creation of Ariop-Inap. On the other side of the planet, in North America, the Hopi tribe and other tribes in the southwest U.S. region have a major spiritual figure in their mythology known as Spider Grandmother. She goes by many names, but is always portrayed as a great spider that takes the form of a wise, kind, elderly woman. She offers lessons, leadership, advice, guidance, and protection. Spider Grandmother, together with the sun god Tawa, created the world and all of its plants and animals. She tells the first humans how to behave and treat each other. She guides spirits, moves between worlds, and she's associated, of course, with weaving. In Navajo mythology, for example, Spider Grandmother teaches women how to spin wool into yarn, how to dye it various colors, and weave it into various textiles like rugs and clothes. More generally, the Spider Grandmother motif is associated with dream catchers and their web-like net. Direct references to the spider's web are used by the Indian Vedics to describe Indra's net, a metaphor of a Buddhist concept describing the fundamental interconnectedness of all things in existence. Even the internet that we use today was originally called the World Wide Web, a reference to the interconnected communications network linking up computers around the planet. In modernity, arachnids have maintained their notable position in the human collective consciousness. Spiders and scorpions are extremely popular in mainstream media. Scorpions are generally associated with danger, violence, and evil, like in The Scorpion King, House of the Scorpion, and the Transformers series. Spiders are more sympathetic, as they're often associated with superheroes like Spider-Man, and all of the spin-off characters like Venom and Black Widow. One of my favorite childhood movies is James and the Giant Peach, and one of the characters in that film is a very friendly spider lady. There's also the much-beloved Charlotte from Charlotte's Web. But of course, spiders also cause fear and disgust. They make for excellent movie monsters, like Aragog in Harry Potter, Shelob in Lord of the Rings, and Kumonga in Son of Godzilla. More specific to the horror genre are films like Tarantulas, The Deadly Cargo, Arachnophobia, and The Giant Spider Invasion. Even fantasy games like Dungeons & Dragons and World of Warcraft make extensive use of giant spiders and scorpions as monsters that players can fight against. Despite their creepy-crawly appearance, many arachnids have counterintuitively found a place in the human home as beloved pets. Scorpions, for example, are actually really easy pets. They require only a safe enclosure, regular food in the form of the occasional cricket, and a suitable environment, like the right humidity and temperature and some natural materials like moss or sand to simulate a natural habitat. While the individual scorpion may live a cushy life as a pet, with a safe home, regular meals, and no predators, the affected species are harmed when animal traffickers disrupt their habitats, remove some from the ecosystem and their wild gene pool, and inevitably kill some of them or destroy their habitat. Consider the emperor scorpion Pandinus imperator. This is a very large, robust, and charismatic scorpion with giant claws. It's a beautiful creature, and more practically, it has a pretty mellow attitude and relatively weak venom. As ideal a pet as a scorpion can be, the Pandinus imperator is overhunted, or I should say, overcollected. Wild populations have been so depleted in some areas that the species has received international conservation protections. Now, the Amblypyge whip spiders are also sometimes adopted as pets, although it's relatively uncommon. The crispy gold-colored African whip spider Damon medius and the cave-dwelling giant amblypygid Damon diadema have both become popular Amblypyge pets. This is probably because they're generally peaceful and shy, but also relatively large and beautiful. Every appendage and feature of the body is visible, and they just look wicked. They're so badass. It's like, you know your cool friend with a pet snake? Well, their cool friend has a giant amblypygid from a cave in Central Africa. Arachnids aren't just used as pets, but they're used for all kinds of stuff. For example, the vinegaroon whip scorpions are cultivated in some places for use as pest control, due to their ability to hunt down larger insects like cockroaches. There's even certain species of mite, like Tyrophagus casei and Acara cyro, that are used to make cheese. The mites inhabit the rind, where they chew on the cheese and chemically process it, as well as producing various byproducts and metabolites. All of these chemicals, and the mites themselves, contribute to the taste and the texture of the cheese. Now that last part might sound too wild to be true, but it is, and it's actually not even that unusual. People around the world eat arachnids all the time. Spiders and scorpions, typically grilled or fried, are considered a crunchy delicacy in many areas of West Africa and East and Southeast Asia. In China, Thailand, and Vietnam, for example, depending on where you go, scorpions are seen as a novelty, as a street food snack, or as a traditional food item that's frequently incorporated into the diet. Fried spider is a very popular snack in some areas of Cambodia, where the zebra-legged tarantula, Haplopelma albostriatum, are farmed or foraged and then fried in oil. There's even a custom of sticking a scorpion into a bottle of alcohol to make scorpion wine, as it's called, which is usually a ferocious 140 to 160 proof beverage used in traditional Chinese medicines. Alright everyone, I think we can end the episode here. This was a super fun and really interesting exploration of the relationship between humans and arachnids. It was so fascinating to learn how ancient peoples interpreted the forms and behaviors of these creatures. When considering all arachnids, there is, perhaps, a definite bias in human cultures towards spiders and scorpions, as these are the most widespread and charismatic and easily identifiable. Other arachnids, like the ticks and the mites and the various whip spiders and whatnot, have had, in comparison, relatively little cultural impact. Scorpions were often seen as wicked entities, sometimes malevolent, sometimes simply indifferent and callous to the affairs of others, even other evil spirits. This highlights a neat dichotomy, where many cultures see the scorpion as both a danger and a ward against danger. Spiders are often seen as creators, both literal and figurative. The literal spinning of the web appears to have directly inspired our species to spin yarn and create textiles. The web they create is like a figurative world of its own, a world within a world, and elevated the spider in human mythology to the position of creators of universes, transcendent of space and time. For our entire history, the arachnids, and particularly the spiders, have been guardians and teachers, a potent force in our mythologies, and a deeply respected and admired part of the natural world around us. If you enjoyed this episode on YouTube, then hit that like button. It really helps me with the YouTube algorithm. If you're listening through a podcast app, then give the show a 5-star review. Subscribe to the channel for more awesome biology content, especially if you want to check out the upcoming series on the myriapods, which will explore the millipedes and the centipedes and all their many-legged cousins. If you want to support the podcast financially, check out the Patreon page or the official store. Also, tell your friends and family and your teachers and classmates about the show. Word of mouth is really helpful too. And as always, thank you so much for listening.